up, people? So I'm gonna be doing some USA 280 with Tim Lewis from Scraptitude. What's up, Tim? Tim, how's it going,
What's
man?
up?
All right, it's good to have you back.
Yeah, it's good to be here,
Been
Todd.
too
Always
long,
good to
man.
see you. Yeah. Well, we said we were going to do it for UFC 280, and here we are.
Yes. So, people that haven't seen you on my show before, maybe you could introduce yourself and let them kind of know what you do.
My name is Timothy Lewis. I'm a man of many names uh, and pseudonyms, but mainly what I do is I produce the Scraptitude podcast. I co-own the brand with Jeffrey Akins, and our specialization is in mixed martial arts analytics, an underdeveloped field. And I do a pay-per-view by pay-per-view a podcast called Tim Talk that's very data centric and helps people place their bets ahead of these landmark UFC events.
And Tim's T, right?
Tim's T. Yeah, we're gonna have to bring back Tim's T. Do some more video content. But we've been in the lab behind the scenes trying to develop some really thought provoking and innovative stuff. And hopefully, once we've got that ironed out, we want to bring a data analytics website to the people. I've been talking to you about that for a long time, but we finally have everything mapped out, Todd. We have the scope of work, we have the visuals, and we're trying to bring the creation to life and provide something new and useful to the MMA community.
Now, do you want to do the four fights or do you want to do the three?
You said three, but I'd be remiss if we did not talk about my guy Mateusz Gamrot here. I'm
Okay.
assuming that's the fourth fight you're speaking to.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with that one since
All right,
he's
great.
starting to become a Scraptitude popular individual, much like Uncle Live.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I love my Polacks. I've got some Polish ancestry. But Mateusz Gamrot, he's just one of those guys where I saw him fight and I had to look into him. And so I looked into the numbers and it was extremely impressive. He was a two-division KSW champion. He has a high level of competition that he's faced, despite the fact that he's only been in the UFC for a short period of time. And we see in the lightweight division the domination of the grappling prowess, and from Khabib Nurmagomedov to now what's his face, Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira. But Mateusz Gamrot is kind of the forgotten man in that equation.
Right.
ADCC Europe champion, tremendous wrestler, very good athlete, complex submission profile. This guy's really got it all as a grappler. And like many submission grapplers lack, he actually has that takedown acumen, that wrestling in his back pocket, and he uses it, and he uses it often.
Yeah, I think he's unique because he goes for the low single a lot, which you don't see
He does,
in
yeah.
most people. Yeah.
And I mean, he kind of takes the knee out of the equation there by doing that, and he covers ground so quickly. That's what really makes it work for him. He's able to traverse these distances, and he's on guys before they know it. A lot of guys you see shooting from far out, it looks bad, but not when Gamrot does it.
So, what do the numbers say as far as him fighting Dariush?
Well, Dariush, his statistical profile came back a little bit better than expected, but even still, he's below Gamrot in a number of categories. The thing I respect about Dariush is he doesn't allow his physical limitations to stymie his approach in the octagon. He's got a lot of skills. He's kind of awkward. He has power. He has submissions. Uh, uh, but at the end of the day, he doesn't have a great athletic profile from my eye, at least. We don't have athletic testing in the UFC, but he seems kind of slow out there. But he doesn't allow that to hinder him. He goes for it all the time. He's constantly trying to finish fights, and sometimes to his own detriment, as emphasized by his 15% loss by finish rate. For those who don't know, he's lost 15% of his career fights by finish.
Yeah, and I always love talking to you because you go by the numbers. So, what do the numbers say for Gamrot versus Dariush as far as how it's won?
Well, what's very interesting to me is that they actually have kind of similar approaches in that if they can, they want to take their opponent to the ground and use their grappling pedigree. But in both in submission grappling and in terms of wrestling, Mateusz Gamrot's credentials outpace those of Dariush. He also lands more takedowns per round than Dariush, but just the eye test could tell you that he's a flat out better wrestler. In terms of the overall statistical profile, I mean, Dariush actually lands more significant or has a better significant strike differential per round. Uh, but some of that to me has to do with the approach of Mateusz Gamrot. He's not like a volume striker. He kind of sneaks in his shots and balances that with his grappling more effectively. Whereas we'll see Dariush in extended striking exchanges. Um, uh, One thing to note is that while there's a difference in UFC experience here, and that would lend people to think that Dariush has this much higher quality of experience than Mateusz Gamrot. The numbers don't really bear that out. And actually, Mateusz Gamrot's opponents have a higher opponent win rate, and he has a higher average opponent wins, which means the average opponent of Mateusz Gamrot has more wins than the average opponent of Beneil Dariush. The numbers there are 15.64, which is the most out of any fighter on the card for Gamrot, to 12.46, which is a solid number for Beneil Dariush, but clearly lower. So I think that's what people are misinterpreting about Mateusz Gamrot. Not only has he won at a very high rate, but he's also done it against very good competition.
Now, when we get to O'Malley versus Yan, this is the one that I'm kind of curious about. Well, even the Dillashaw fight I'm also curious about. But O'Malley, Yan, do the numbers say that Yan runs him over, or what are you seeing there?
That's what I'm seeing. And I mean, of course, I had my priors about this fight. My priors told me that Sean O'Malley was going to get killed. But of course, that's why I do the numbers. And I try to really be balanced in weighing my prior assumptions with what the data says to me. That's what happened with this Manon Fior versus Caitlin Chookagian fight. My priors told me Chookagian could take that one, but then as I looked into it, there was just certain things that worried me about her, namely her even significant strike differential. She kind of seems like a compiler type of striker. Anyways, I don't want to get too much into that one, but going shot for shot with Manon Fiorot, like the numbers suggest she might, that doesn't look like an advantageous type of fight to me for Caitlin Chookagian. For Sean O'Malley, the stats bear it out that his strength of competition hasn't been that high. I mean, great, he puts in highlight reel performances against Julian Paiva and Chris Moutinho, but we saw what happened when he stepped up and fought Marlon Vera. Another thing to consider about Sean O'Malley is that he's had these PED busts in the past, these Ostarine busts, which they say come from tainted supplements, but it's something to watch for. I mean, I know all these guys are on steroids, but getting caught with something like Ostarine isn't a good reflection. But getting into the numbers, they're hard to weigh for O'Malley in one context because some things like a significant strike differential are heavily inflated. His knockdown rate is heavily inflated because he's fighting nobodies that are oftentimes like old flyweights or guys that aren't top 15 level. Petr Yan, meanwhile, has that strong strength of schedule, and he's done formidable things to formidable opponents. So to me, it's just an issue of people are going to wake up to this fight and realize that what Sean O'Malley does, he can't do against this level of competition. And we saw a little bit of that against Pedro Munoz when his dynamic striking profile was reduced to long-reaching right hands. So that's kind of what I expect to see here is Petr Yan's high-shell defense, Sean O'Malley trying to figure out a way in, and ultimately getting bludgeoned to a second or third round knockout.
If the fight does go as you expect, and I kind of expect, why do you think the UFC did it?
I think the UFC is, well, first of all, it's a name on this card. The UFC has kind of botched the handling of this bantamweight division, though, in my opinion. Of course, they see the dollar and cents there with O'Malley, but the matchmaking made little sense to me. Merab versus Aldo made little sense because Merab isn't going to fight the champion Aljamain Sterling. So to me, it made a lot more sense to match up Merab and Petr Yan, who has already gotten 2 cracks at the belt there. Then there's Marlon Vera, who's now just hanging about because Petr Yan kind of shied away from that fight. And Marlon Vera could have been paired up with, Henry Cejudo's been looking for a fight. But I don't know why they made this fight. It's really questionable for me. I think it's mainly because of Twitter banter and them trying to get Petr Yan on this Abu Dhabi card. I think that's what it is. And Sean O'Malley said yes. Petr Yan's there for a paycheck. And reportedly, they promised both these fighters a title shot should they win, which is a little annoying to me, considering how much allure can there be for Petr Yan, who's going to dominate Sean O'Malley, getting that third crack at Aljamain Sterling. Oh, yeah, right. TJ Dillashaw, that's the other player there. TJ Dillashaw should be fighting Marlon Vera, or he should be fighting Henry Cejudo again for that rematch. Something like it's just very odd that they promoted T.J. Dillashaw to this point of the division after a questionable performance against Sandhagen. They're putting Petr Yan in almost a set-me-up fight for another title shot. And Sean O'Malley, while he's a fan favorite, while he has an exciting style against a lower caliber of opponent, he just doesn't merit this opportunity, and that's going to show because once these guys are locked in the cage, the truth comes out.
Now, I think the last two fights are pretty competitive. What do you think about Dillashaw and Aljamain?
The Dillashaw versus Aljamain Sterling fight is interesting from a stylistic perspective. I agree. I kind of expected TJ Dillashaw to pop a little bit more in his statistical profile. I know that the FDR statistic, which isn't currently used in it because I don't really view it as a predictive metric, but that loved TJ Dillashaw. However, to me in this fight, while stylistically it's intriguing, you've got TJ Dillashaw, who's a good wrestler. He's going to be on paper hard to take down, and he has this the striking with some real pop to it against a questionable striker in Aljamain Sterling. And I see why people are like, kind of throwing some flyers out there on TJ Dillashaw are a little bit curious. The odds right now, Aljamain Sterling is like a minus 180, so he's not even a 2-1 favorite here. But I thought TJ Dillashaw looked so against Corey Sandhagen. I had him losing that fight. When we look at the way that Aljamain Sterling manhandled Sandhagen versus how much difficulty TJ Dillashaw had with his wrestling, I think he shot 2 for 17 on takedowns in that fight. To me, that expresses the difference in physicality between these two guys. Aljamain Sterling is a huge bantamweight, and I think he's going to have an advantage in these scrambles, and I think he's going to have TJ Dillashaw defending a lot of the fight, whether that's in these grappling exchanges, trying to defend submissions, whether that's in the striking where Aljamain Sterling has his death by 1,000 cuts volume approach. That's going to make things tricky for a guy who relies a lot on reads and head movement like TJ Dillashaw.
Yeah, I think maybe the reason they made Yan and O'Malley is because they think Dillashaw is going to beat Sterling.
Which then would line up for a Petr Yan, TJ Dillashaw fight. But I think the UFC underestimates Aljamain Sterling at every turn. And if they had the stats that I'm looking at, I don't think they would be doing that any longer. In that first Petr Yan fight, I called for Aljamain Sterling to win. Then the second one, I called for Petr Yan. But even still, I said this is like it's a toss-up. It's a 50-50 fight. The analytics are very close. And the first fight wasn't the greatest representation of what Sterling's capable of. Here, he's getting an easier opponent in TJ Dillashaw, in my perspective. At 36 years old, freshly turned 36 years old, I don't think that the athletic profile of TJ Dillashaw could be what it is. He's coming off of a knee injury that held him out for many months. And just statistically, you look at every single statistical category other than like punching power, and Aljamain Sterling outpaces TJ Dillashaw. And that's with the addition of being a bigger, stronger guy in the octagon.
Now, so the main event, this is what we're all waiting for. What are the numbers looking at Oliveira and Makhachev?
Well, on Tim Talk, I gave a little bit of a rundown for the Beta 1 equation. And what I'm doing on Tim Talk is I provide you the perspective of the odds makers. Beta 1 is it's essentially an aggregate of several data points that capture experience and win rate and strength of schedule. And Charles Oliveira by far was the leader in the Beta 1 equation for this card here. And that's largely because of his experience. At 33 years old, just turned 33 on Monday, I believe, Charles Oliveira has 41 career fights. That's like 2 careers. That's 2 of Islam Makhachev's careers, right? Basically in terms of total fights. And people say, oh, he quit. Oh, this happened. Oh, that happened. Well, when you have a career as long as Charles Oliveira, you have to kind of break it off into sample sizes. And if we take this lightweight sample size after the Paul Felder fight, you look at what he's done there. That's like you have to evaluate that in isolation from everything else that's happened to Charles Oliveira, because he's been cutting his teeth against really high-level guys for a long time. You look at Khabib Nurmagomedov and Islam Makhachev, you look at those early 10 fights in their career, they aren't like Charles Oliveira's early career. So I think that's very underestimated about Charles Oliveira. The question here is the methodical top position grappling approach of Islam Makhachev versus the risk abandon and all-purpose lethality of Charles Oliveira. And I would say if you're going to bet on somebody winning rounds, Islam Makhachev has a great profile to do that. He's going to land a takedown per round, according to his stats, and he's going to be he's going to control the tempo once he gets there. He's not like Khabib Nurmagomedov, who just wails on people once he establishes positional dominance. He's very like slow paced in how he goes through his progressions, and that's not to say he's not very good in that realm. But Charles Oliveira is going to be hitting him with constant stimuli. He's going to have to be defending submissions. He's going to have to be defending strikes. There's not going to be periods of rest for Islam Makhachev. And I think that a guy like him who likes to work methodically is going to be prone to make more mistakes when he's forced to up the tempo of decision making. I'll tell you what, I don't believe what Islam Makhachev is saying about striking with Oliveira and knocking him down. I'm not buying that one. I think he shoots for a takedown the first 45 seconds of this fight. Which way are you leaning? I'm curious about that because you always seem to favor the wrestlers, Todd.
Well, from my experience training, when you get a guy who's really good on top of you, the key in jiu-jitsu is it's hard to attack someone straight on. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to get angles, and when you're smothered, it's hard to turn your body. So I think that's where Oliveira might have some problems if Islam's able to get on top of him.
He's going to have to keep those hips live for sure.
Yeah, and also as you're getting hit over rounds, you're getting worn out, carrying the guy's weight. You saw that with, well, you didn't see this fight, but there was one here, actually. This guy, Shay Conley, he fought a guy, Josh Anderson here in Tulsa. Mm-hmm. And Shay Conley's a great wrestler, and, Anderson was just sucking the air out of the arena by the last couple of rounds. Carrying the guy's weight just really loud. So that's the thing that I'm interested to see is if he does go the ground, as you suspect he will, I'm interested to see how the fight plays out there.
Yeah, well, this isn't going to be taking down Dan Hooker, for example. This isn't going to be taking down Bobby Green. And Charles Oliveira, at least we saw in that Kevin Lee fight, his activity level off of his back was tremendous. Is Islam Makhachev going to be able to neutralize the hips of Charles Oliveira and keep him stationary? Yeah. Maybe. But I think that Charles Oliveira is going to use his submissions to scramble and try to get back into the striking realm. Contrary to what a lot of people think, I don't believe he's going to be playing a lot of jiu-jitsu. I think he's going to try to knock out Islam Makhachev. But the thing is, Charles Oliveira, most submission wins in UFC history. It's not like we haven't seen Makhachev in some questionable positions against lesser grapplers before. So nobody's perfect in the sport, and we can also go back and cite instances where Charles Oliveira got elbows rained on him by Paul Felder of all people. But this is by far the toughest fight of Islam Makhachev's career. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think we could argue that if this is the toughest opponent that Charles Oliveira has ever fought. Not to say that Charles Oliveira has beaten all of his toughest opponents, but he's been in there with a lot of guys.
It's big in this fight. And it cracks people's curiosity, the element of the unknown when you have two big unknowns, so to speak, stylistic.
Well, I think Charles Oliveira is very much so unknown, but Islam Makhachev has had very little resistance so far in his UFC career. And despite having very little resistance, we've seen that his durability has come into question. I mean, of course, he got knocked out famously by, I'm blanking on the name, but a nobody. And I think I've seen him wobbled in a couple fights. I think Drew Dober caught him with a good shot. There's been a couple instances where he's been hit with like quick jabs, lead hooks, shots that don't seem that consequential, but seem to catch him like in between things, and that rattle him. Now, in most of those fights, he's been able to then drag the bout to the ground. But I am skeptical of the durability of Islam Makhachev in a way that I'm not any longer skeptical about the durability of Charles Oliveira.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to come up with. So what, as far as these fights that we've talked about, what are you looking at, or is there anything analytically that you're looking at outside of that?
Well, I can tell you the bets that I'm interested in that I put down on Tim Talk. I think that, and out of the fights we talked, well, I'll just run through all the fights, even the ones we haven't talked about. I've got Bilal beating Sean Brady. I think he's going to do it by decision. You can lock that in plus 270 or 175 on FanDuel. I got Manon Fiorot. I don't love that fight for betting purposes. I think she wins the decision. I think Mateusz Gamrot has his coming out party. A lot of people are depressing his capacity after a tough fight with Arman Tsarukyan, but this is about where his athleticism is really going to shine. I think he gets Beneil Dariush out of there inside the distance, just based on Mateusz Gamrot's 50% finish rate and the fact that Beneil Dariush has struggled some when he stepped up in competition, and he has that 15% loss by finish rate. He does make mistakes, and he's going to get frustrated in there. Petr Yan, I have him winning by knockout in rounds 2 or 3. You can lock that in on FanDuel for plus 500. Traditionally a slow starter. I'm curious if we see any grappling from Petr Yan. That was like kind of an underrated element of his game that we saw in the first Aljamain Sterling fight. But I think that he warms up in the first round, gets his looks, and then punishes Sean in 2 and 3. For the Sterling versus Dillashaw fight, I've got Sterling by decision. I think TJ Dillashaw is savvy enough to fight off submission attempts. Aljamain Sterling's not going to knock him out, but I think TJ Dillashaw is going to be on the defense and maybe have Aljamain Sterling on his back for a lot of that fight. So I got Sterling by decision. That's like plus 140. You can get that. Then I have Charles Oliveira inside the distance. He's a prolific finisher, finishes 90-something% of his fights. If you believe he's going to get this one done, he's not going to do it by decision. But I do love the diversity of Charles Oliveira's skill set. And it just speaks to me, the age-adjusted experience here. He's still in the prime of his career at 33 years old. And I do believe that the Makhachev team is overlooking Charles Oliveira a little bit, talking about going to 170, talking about knocking him down. Khabib saying how it's going to be the easiest fight. There's a lot of I just don't think they're processing the proper amount of gravity for this fight. It's a little bit of disrespect to Charles Oliveira, who continuously improves. So yeah, I mean, I know that a lot of sharps are on Islam Makhachev, but me as a touter of age-adjusted experience, me as a person who heavily values somebody who goes for the finish relentlessly in a fight, I think that Charles Oliveira is going to give Islam Makhachev all he can handle and end up getting the job done inside the distance.
No, age-adjusted experience. That might be a new stat that I haven't heard you mention this before. Maybe talk about it.
It's not quite a stat. I'm trying to properly capture it in this statistic, but essentially what age-adjusted experience is it's how many fights you have and how old are you. We know that a fighter's prime generally happens between the years of 27 and 33 years old. It's a sport that takes a long time to accumulate experience and match that experience with your physical ability. You might be a better athlete when you're 23 years old, 25 years old, but by the time you've accumulated the skills and you have the mental temperament to handle the highest level of competition, you're generally 27 to 33 years old, at which point generally your athleticism starts to tail off, and we see guys starting to get caught. And that happens over and over again. Guys think like a new generation comes in. People just lose a step, and it's almost imperceptible to the eye, but it bears out in the results over and over again. There's a long-standing pattern there. But age-adjusted experience, yeah. So how many fights do you have? Are your fights against good competition? And how old are you at this present juncture with all of that experience? Charles Oliveira is 33 years old. He has 42 fights. Islam Makhachev is 30 years old and has 23 fights. That doesn't mean that Islam Makhachev is going to lose, but it means that he's done a hell of a lot less problem-solving inside the octagon and dealt with a lot less adversity than Charles Oliveira has.
Now, what are some other things you're going to be doing with Scraptitude maybe since last time we talked?
Some of the things that we've done, we had our first public fantasy MMA league, which was a big success. It was hard to pull together. It was all run through spreadsheets, but it has a very unique scoring system that allows you to kind of play the game like you would fantasy football. MMA has been behind in the fantasy sphere because people have failed to make a season-long concept for it. That's something that we devised at Scraptitude. We did a ton of beta testing for it. We introduced it to public leagues, and it was a lot of fun. The only drawback was Jeff, a member of Scraptitude, won the whole damn thing, so what I ended up doing is the finalists, I refunded them all their buy-in just to assure that there was nothing below board happening there. But Jeff really showed out for the Scraptitude brand there, both his knowledge of the scoring system and his aptitude for picking winning fights. But that's something that we're hoping to offer as premium content for our website to be, our data analytics website to be. Our goal is to be players both in the mixed martial arts analytics sphere, which is our primary focus right now. We want to be providing people with cutting edge information that improves their decision making and helps them better understand the sport through the math that defines it. And then we're working on, which is a bigger project just in terms of the groundwork you have to lay to make it possible, having this fantasy MMA happen in a system that's a little more automated, that doesn't require so much personal oversight like me managing this last public offering. But we are looking to have a public league in 2023, and people that are interested in that can hit me up on Twitter at Timothy E. Lewis. Just, ask me about it. I'll put you in, and leagues are generally 3 divisions, five teams per division, so 15 people total. There's a regular season, there's a postseason, and you don't compete head-to-head. You're competing with everybody simultaneously, but there are weekly adjustments you have to make, roster adds, roster drops, waiver claims, all of those things that if you competed in other fantasy sports now transition to the MMA realm.
Now, have you come up with any new nicknames for people?
New nicknames for people. Let me think about that. I know that there have been some. I'll tell you what. Leon Edwards certainly removed the proverbial skin of leftover Leon Edwards, like a snake would shed its skin, with his decapitating of Kamaru Usman. A fight that I did predict correctly using the power of the Scratitude analytics. That's kind of funny. Like, people hear my rhetoric, my banter, and they assume that I was calling for Leon Edwards to get trounced. But I recognize the place of age-adjusted experience. I saw his statistical profile. Kamaru Usman at 35 years old. He looked good in the fight. But, these declines happen incrementally, and it only takes a moment of exploitation. And Leon Edwards was there for it. But other nicknames, I'd have to put more thought into that. I'm kind of right now very much so in my data analytics mindset as opposed to my, the hyperbolic way that I can also be in my approach to the sport.
And how hyped are you for this pay-per-view?
It's one of the best in recent memory. 281 is going to be really good as well. But this one, I skipped UFC 289 for Tim Talk. I didn't do any data for it, and I'm glad I didn't because they changed all the fights in the last minute. But I took my focus from then and placed it on this card. So I have had like a month plus of preparation for this one. The data was cataloged weeks before I recorded. I mean, if that doesn't speak to my excitement, I don't know what does. Like, the work almost gets done for me when we have a card like this and fights that are this compelling. I had a hard time trimming it to just 6 fights on Tim Talk 280 because there's so many good fights on the card. It was really hard to narrow it down. But yes, I'm excited. I'm very, very excited. I hope my guy Sean Brady gets it done. Philly guy, don't think he will. But the Gamrot coming out party, Charles Oliveira providing further vindication for the analytics we're using against it's hard to know what to make of Islam Makhachev. That's something that I'd like to know. Everybody calls him the heir apparent to Khabib, like he's this protege, he's the next one up. But really, there's only been one dominant Dagestani champion, and that is Khabib Nurmagomedov in the UFC anyhow. How do you view Islam Makhachev through this prism of being a protege, being in the same camp, being a Dagestani with a grappling prowess? What do you make of it all, and how does he stack up to his predecessor, Khabib Nurmagomedov?
I mean, he might have a little bit of a different style, but it's just it's effective,
Can't deny that.
It's just like you talked about Ankalaev, who's going to fight down the road, which I'm sure you'll talk about. But there's just something about these guys, that they don't lose very much, in total.
Oh, yeah, you look at the win-loss.
Yeah, it's insane. The win-loss is ridiculous. And, it's kind of hard to – that's what I'm interested in. I want to see the ground exchange between these two guys. That's really what I'm interested in seeing. So, yeah, it's going to be –
Doubt for a second there. I hit my social media limit.
Yeah, it's just – like I like hearing you talk about just the analytics because it kind of just splits things into rather than people talking from emotion and stuff. Because I really don't get emotionally involved either. I'm more interested in the technique.
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of people are just fans of certain guys of the sport, and really my fandom is like I love the problem-solving aspect of the sport. And I love watching these guys' problems. I mean, there's some guys I'm always going to hate on, like TJ Dillashaw, for example. But I can still recognize his skill profile, and I can still tout aspects of it through the analytics. Uh, uh, but it has made me a different kind of fan of the sport. And it's why I've become such a big fan of Charles Oliveira. I mean, there's the human aspect of being a person that can both in life and in the sport, overcome adversity after adversity. And then there's the problem solving of it all. Like, it's not just what you've done, but who you've done it against. And Charles Oliveira's solved a lot of different problems. This is a unique problem. It's a newer problem. But I also think we're going to see aspects of Charles Oliveira's game that we haven't had a lot of opportunity to witness. And I don't think that there's any lack of preparation in terms of grappling acumen. Yeah, he brought in that Iranian. Apparently had that guy there for 3 years for his wrestling. He's been out wrestling everybody. Now, they've been a bunch of strikers, but he has been the dominant wrestler in a lot of fights now. Let's see how that transpires, if he does have any capacity to stuff the takedown. Because he's great in the clinch. Like, Charles Oliveira is a very, very good fighter in tight. And it's going to be messy in there for Islam Makhachev. He's going to be shooting from far out. You give Charles Oliveira a front headlock position or something like that. You give him a Darce, whatever. Like, that's a bad man right there. And Islam Makhachev, back to that sentiment, it's not what you've done, but who you've done it against. He has a lot to prove in that respect. He has a lot to prove.
And now, where can people kind of check out Scraptitude?
Yeah, I would say the best place to hit us up is on Twitter. We have an Instagram here, both of them at Scraptitude. We don't update the content as much on the Instagram. We like the type of engagement we get on Twitter. You can see podcast clips on there. You can really get fed to all of our information. We have a link there that'll hook you up with where to find our podcast, where to find any articles, where to find all the good stuff. And you can also find me at Timothy E. Lewis. I'm always talking fights. Like, my goal here is for this to be my life. So I'm so invested in this stuff. It would drive a lot of people insane. The type of information that I've canvassed, that I've created, just to become better at what I want to do. I'm not trying to build myself up, but a lot of things that I'm doing here are somewhat unprecedented. Or there's very few people that are doing this, and even less people that are just providing the information here through the public mediums that anyone can access. So if you're interested in this game and you want to become a better analyst, you want to have more informed decision making, listen to Tim talk, follow Scraptitude, hit me up because you're going to get, at the very least, you're going to get perspective to consider that's going to make you more privy come fight night.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I brought you on so long ago, because I thought a lot of the stuff you're doing was unique.
You saw it early.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there's no doubt what you say. Even now, I don't really see many guys doing it unless I just haven't come across them.
There's guys that sell data sheets event by event. They're looking to make a few bucks or whatever. I'll tell you what, it's a tough industry. There's a lot of content creators, and there's a lot of young people that are interested in this sport. And so it's about some of these people maturing and wanting to view it through a more typical sports lens. There's a lot of people that are fans of the theatrics, a lot of people that are fans of the personalities, all those kinds of things. But as the sport evolves, these analytics, just like analytics are a part of every sport, are going to become more and more ingratiated with the casual dialogue. And you're going to be saying things like, oh, this person's significant strike differential, this person's win rate, this person's, these are going to be the common ways that you assess who a fighter is and what they're good at. Because right now there's a lot of subjectivity and a lot of people talking that rah-rah, but there's not a lot of points that we can uniformly agree on because they're objective. That's what I'm seeking to do, provide objective information that improves decision-making in the context of mixed martial arts. And there's a lot in the pipeline that we have. There's a lot of things that we're going to accomplish in these next couple of years.
Yeah, and I noticed UFC brought their own gambling expert and all that.
Yeah, what I mean, the Greek, is that who that is?
Yeah,
who is this guy? I don't know. He gives me the heebie-jeebies on there. Hit up your boy Tim, UFC. I got you. If they would give me the opportunity to revamp the UFC stats website, it would be they have no business with their website looks impoverished. It looks like some third world analytics. They deserve better, and if they want better, I'm your guy.
Yeah, I'll be sure to mention that.
Yeah, whoever your people are. You got people, Todd. I know you've got
Yeah,
people.
yeah, I do. Yeah, see if we could do something, but
Well, I'm one of your people now, Todd.
absolutely, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I was on, like I said, I caught you early as far as the analytics and all that stuff you're doing. Well,
Well,
man,
Todd, it's
so
a pleasure. Yeah.
and it's always good to hear your straight shooting on the analytics and everything, and I appreciate you taking the time, and
I'm
it's
so
good
grateful.
again.
I'm so grateful to be on the Todd Atkins show, man. It's always great, and nobody sets the stage, asks the questions, and has the genuine curiosity that I find with you, Todd. Like you're even keeled. You just have a genuine love and curiosity for the sport, and it's kind of rare. A lot of people have like it's about them as much as it's about the sport. For you, it's all about the pureness of this competition.
Right. Well, man, I appreciate it. It's great catching up with you, and maybe we'll have to do something with Uncle Live when he
Oh,
fights.
yeah, Jan Blachowicz, Magomed Ankalaev. I love both of those fighters, but you're gonna know which way I'm leaning. We'll have to link for that one, Todd.
All right, man. Well,
All
take
right,
care.
be easy. Yeah, appreciate you.
All
You have
right.
a great weekend. All right.
You too.